Greetings YouTube! It's been a while since I showed my face, and of course this video is probably what everyone has been waiting for. There's a couple of reasons why this video is not out like sooner. First off, of course, I did join a Vanguard Masters Cup during the weekend that was past, and I don't really want to make a video out of it and everyone knows what I'm running. You kinda get it. I do want to release this earlier, but then again, I don't think it's the best strategy for me to release this video. But then again, it's better late than never, and hey, you guys on the English side could take benefit of what I found. This video, of course, will be going through the deck profile for what I am currently running for Unrivaled Bruce. It might not be the best, and you might be able to come up with a much better deck list than I am, but hey, this is what I'm currently running. And if you are following the community tab on my YouTube channel, you will notice that I actually got 16th place with Bruce for the Vanguard Master Cup that was just passed in my country. It's not too bad of a achievement, although 16th place is nothing to it's not really something that you might think of, hey, that's really amazing, but hey, 16th place in a 60 plus tournament, I think that's something. In any case, let's get on with this deck profile. So here is what I'm currently running in a nutshell for a Bruce. It's almost quite the standard build, although I don't really focus on Pandemonium tactics. I do focus more on Hellblast, because personally I don't like, or should I say I dislike, the Pandemonium tactics build, because Pandemonium tactics build, although it's really strong, it has an insane OTK potential, but it's an all out or nothing build. You go big or you go home. So that build, although it's really strong for that one turn, it's not really that great as an overall, because in a tournament settings where you have to play like 6 to 7 round of Swiss, only then we will see if you made it to top 8. There's a chance that you might not get the key pieces, because Pandemonium tactics does rely on you getting your key pieces. This deck not really as much, and since you're able to kind of like salvage some of your key pieces from the Soul via Lyle skill, it's actually not too bad. And not to mention, you don't deck out as fast as Pandemonium tactics, and this deck is not really as counterblast heavy as Pandemonium tactics as well. Some skills over here are optional, you don't really have to use it, but of course if you could use it, it's the much better play for you to deliver a really disgusting blow to your opponent. And of course, if you do want to build this deck profile for yourself to see if you can like maybe tweak a little bit, the IDs for the deck lock is on the top. I did one for the English side, so if you are from the English player, you can go ahead and put that ID. You will be able to see this exact deck list. Or for those who are using the Japanese side, you can use the Japan ID, which is on the top. Feel free to let me know what you guys think, and of course, what are you currently running for your Bruce build. Now let's go down in detail on what each and every card does for this deck. First up, of course, is the Ridelines. There's nothing really new after, like, I don't know, maybe 1 to 2 years of Overdress. There's nothing really new to the Ridelines, unless of course DBT06 changes that, then that's a different story. So the whole Ridelines is basically focused on getting you a little bit of soul. I mean, at the end of the day, when you ride into Bruce, you should be able to have 4 souls in your soul, because Steve, that lets you soul charge 1, and of course, even if you call the starter from Steve's skill, you're able to put the starter back to soul with Richard's skill in order to draw 1. So the main focus of the whole Rideline is basically more so towards drawing you into the key pieces rather than letting you soul charge. Although this deck does not really need a lot of key pieces, but then again, if you do have like some of the key pieces, it's actually much more beneficial to have them in your hand. I mean, any deck that draws you pieces is actually really good. And speaking of the Rideline, during the grade 1 turn, since you will be calling out the starter behind the Vanguard, it will make a 14k attacking column. So most of the time it's an auto no guard from your opponent. If you are going second, the going first, it does not really matter as much. It's an auto no guard for your grade 1 Steve turn, because it's a 14k to their 8k Vanguard. Even if they throw down a 15k shield, it's still going to be 1 pass. So unless they want to gamble, then it's fine. Even if you don't hit them, it's still a 1 card less from their hand. It's not really that bad. The soul charge 1 for Steve is actually really important, because it will dictate what targets that you will be calling with Lyle. Because Lyle could superior call anything from the soul during your final rush turn. So let's say if you did soul charge a doggo or one of your two attackers, either Marjorie or Meagan, you can actually call them out, which is really good, and because that will take off one key card pieces from your hand, so that you don't really need to like keep those cards and you can just discard them to ride, or you can just like focus on getting other card pieces that you might need, possibly Hellblast full dive itself. Oh, and also speaking of the right line, you should remember to call one extra rearguard out if you're going against certain matchup. For example, Prison, most of the Dragon Empire, unless you're going first, then it's okay. If you're going second, it's much better for you to call one extra rearguard because there's a potential retire. That extra draw is actually quite important for your whole game plan. And lastly, of course, when you Soul Blast for either Violence Bruce or Unrivaled Bruce, do try to keep Steve in the soul, because if you do not have any viable targets in your soul to be called to the rearguard by Lyle's skill, it's actually much better for you to call the Steve as a 13k booster at the back. Steve does play a significant role in boosting cards like Meagan. So yeah, that's the whole right line. It's nothing has really much changed and the game plan still remains the same. Just you need to maybe just tweak a little bit on your game plan just to be sure that you get your skills off. Next is the trigger lineup. The trigger lineup is just standard. I don't really like tweak those because each and every trigger is actually super important. And of course, the crit, the draw, and the front are all triggers with skills, except the heal, that is. So first off, of course, this deck, of course, again, do rely a little bit on you drawing into your pieces, although not really as much as Pandemonium, but this deck still does require a significant amount of pieces in your hand. Now, based on the trigger lineup, the deck actually is still technically running for a 4 draw trigger lineup, because the over trigger is actually a draw trigger in a sense as well. So the whole deck is actually running 4 draw triggers and 5 critical triggers if you do drive check into the over trigger, that is. So the fronts here are at 4 because survivability to the turn 4 is actually really important. So it all comes down to your third turn where you first ride into Bruce, because during that turn you do not really want to call anything out. So means that the more shield you have in your hand, the better you will do to survive until the next turn. So the 20k shield front here is super important. Critical is without a doubt the best trigger in the format. Critical trigger is the best trigger because, you know, it helps in ends game quickly. It's critical trigger. Who doesn't want that? You could technically not run the 4 fronts and you just dump like 8 criticals into the deck. But then again, as I mentioned before, the 20k shield is actually much more better for you to have instead of like, you know, 15k shields, because, you know, survival is still quite important until the 4th turn. That is why I choose to run a standard trigger lineup. Now, as for the heal, I don't run any of the new heal triggers with skill because it's not really as meta defining for now. Not every deck has a get critical or a restand, so it's actually much better for me to run a 15k shield instead of like a 10k heal that may or may not use its skill. So I guess 4 standard heal is still the way to go for now, unless there's some changes in the future which will allows you to run 4 of the new heal triggers. But then again, that's what I run. So as we go to the main deck, first up, this is something I want to get out of the way, which is the 4 PGs. It's a PG. You're supposed to run 4 of it. You could run less, but anyone who runs less than 4 PG is literally out of their mind. But it's really up to you. For me, this is a 4 off, definitely. No matter what deck you're playing, this should be a 4 off. With the new Sentinel that is going to be released in the next 2 weeks, technically ideal lineup here will be 3 of these PG and 1 of the Blitz PEG order, if that makes sense. But yeah, so far for now, since it's not out, so 4 PGs. Nothing much to be said here. So of course, the next one we have is the Doggo Monitoring Gear Dober. This is a 4 off easily because this is your soul charge resource. This is also your booster. This is also your power booster, and he can act as a discard fodder. This is by far the strongest supporting unit for Bruce. Not only does it act as an 8k booster for your 10k attacker, for example Meagan or maybe Marjorie, it also goes to soul, and you're able to give any unit on the board plus 10k, which is super good, which will make Meagan a 30k without any skills but her own. It's insane. It's 30k with just like this unit. it's super disgusting. You can also give the power to Vanguard if for example your opponent does gets like a lucky damage trigger. Yeah, you could consider putting the power to the Vanguard and forcing down a hand card from your opponent to guard Unrivaled Bruce. This is probably going to be your main target to be called by Lyle, which is this card. From the soul, if you do have the doggo in your soul, because you know you can just keep recycling gear Dober as long as you're able to superior call from the soul, which is very good, which also makes the gear Dober one of the most important units to have in your soul or in your hand. And not to mention, the doggo is most probably going to be your imprisoned priority unit. So if you're going against Seraph Snow, where your opponent just like imprisons left and right, this card should be one of the priority units for you to put into the prison, since you're able to keep on reuse the doggo skill. Yeah, this card is one of the main strategies for you to abuse the prison mechanic. It's really a strong card, and not to mention, I think it's only a common, if I'm not mistaken. So any of you budget players out there, you should definitely get this at 4-piece. It's just too good. Next, of course, is Diabolos Jetter Wait. This is only at 3. When people saw this in my deck profile, they actually was quite shocked, and they don't really know what's his skill. They will come and ask me. So basically, whenever he's on the field, if my Vanguard is Bruce, or a Vanguard has a Bruce name in it, basically just move him to soul and give the Vanguard +10. It's a relatively simple skill, but then again, as mentioned before, since he does move to soul, this card is actually a really great counter against Seraph Snow once again. So similar to the doggo, this card and doggo is sort of like those cards that I would abuse if I'm going against a prison. So although it's not like, you know, you might think this is just a -1 from the hand to give a 10k booster for Unrivaled Bruce, but hey, give this card a try and use the skill when you are in Unrivaled, and you will notice Unrivaled hits like a truck. I mean, unless your opponent is throwing down 2 PGs to guard Unrivaled Bruce both time, you have to think to yourself, hey, 2 PGs, that's 4 cards from the hand. Otherwise, it's gonna be more. Yeah, and of course, since Unrivaled Bruce does restand, weight skill just gets more value out of it, because you know you're hitting 10k more on the restand, even on the first swing as well as the second swing. It's actually not too bad. Yeah, this card is only at 3. He's one of the less important pieces of your whole combo turn, although it will be nice if you have like one of him in the hand during the turn 4, so that you can just like buff Bruce just a little bit stronger. It will increase your potential in OTKing for the whole turn. Next, moving on to the grade 2, we have Diabolos striker Lyle. Now, as mentioned before, Lyle here not only gives you soul, because he does soul charge 2, you are able to basically recycle whatever unit that went to soul, and you basically just superior call him out. So cards like these are excellent target to be called with Lyle. The doggo, Wade, as well as Steve are excellent targets to be called, because you can just keep abusing them over and over again. You could also call out Meagan as well as Marjorie should you don't have any of these pieces in your hand. So which makes this kind of less reliant on the key pieces to be drawn from your deck to your hand. He is also one of the important units for you to abuse against a Seraph Snow player. Yes, the whole deck is basically trying to play around the Seraph Snow player, because I do expect a lot of Seraph Snow player, because Seraph Snow is the meta at the moment. So it makes sense. Even if Seraph Snow is not the meta, this whole lineup is actually not too bad. The Seraph Snow counter is basically just a benefit. It's just a plus on running this build. Now, since this card does fulfill his function after you call him, he will usually be a cost fodder for Marjorie's skill, because Marjorie does requires you to put 1 rear guard back to the soul in order to activate her skill. So this card will definitely be the cost for Marjorie to be to put skill. Although if you do find yourself lacking of attacker, he is a 15k attacker as well. So you could also push him to be your attacker if you don't have any of them in your hand by the turn 4. He's not too bad of an attacker. although you do need quite a bit of buffing to do. For example, Hellblast as well as Doggo to basically buff him up to the level of Meagan, because Meagan just gets power like there's no cost to it. Lyle is one of the best support that Bruce had up until DBT04. And not to mention he's relatively cheap too. Next, of course, is the new addition Diabolos Madonna Meagan. She will definitely be at 4-piece. Her main role is being an attacker. Even with me not saying anything, she should definitely be your main attacker. I was actually contemplating whether to run Meagan or Eden, but after several rounds of testing with both Eden as well as Meagan, I find Meagan to be a much more effective attacker than Eden, because Eden, although you do get a crit, but the power level is not as high as Meagan. So it is actually much more easier to guard Eden than Meagan, because Meagan just gets like really big during your turn 4 turn. So it's actually really disgusting. And Meagan is the sole reason why Hellblast build is on par with Pandemonium Tactics build, because you know Pandemonium and Brainwash, these both of these cards goes together, which means that you don't really need to soul charge a lot and you still get almost the same power as Brainwash Pandemonium build. If you're going full combo, Meagan will be attacking for 40k on the first attack versus Brainwash, which at the minimum, if you're attacking with one whole column, is going to be attacking for maybe 70k. So 70k versus a 40k, I guess you could see like, you know, 40, even at 40k, my opponent does not really want to guard it anymore, because 40k to their 13k Vanguard is actually a lot to guard. So yeah, that's basically why Meagan can be a replacement for a Pandemonium and Brainwash build. The plus 10 with no cost is actually super disgusting. And you know, as mentioned here, the record power to date after the tournament is 93k attacking column. Together with Steve at the back, Meagan is actually attacking for 93, which means that I did get a lot of triggers, which is super disgusting. It's an auto no guard, unless of course the opponent tries to PG. So, but here's the question: do you want to PG Unrivaled or do you want to PG this? It's actually really hard to decide. Technically, you could hit harder by replaying Meagan inside the Pandemonium build, because alongside Brainwash, Meagan alongside Brainwash is gonna hit for, I think, possibly more than 100 plus k. But why? You're still hitting for 1 damage. You don't really need to pump up that high of a number to hit for 1 damage. But yeah, that's basically Meagan. Meagan here is a godsend to Hellblast build, or anyone that does not want to run the OTK build. Next up is the Upward Acrobat Marjorie. Now Marjorie, does this card even need further introduction? This card from DBT01 is a super stapler unit. No matter what build you're running, you will be running her, even for an OTK build, which is super surprising for me. Although this card will not hit at hard, but she is far more valuable than Meagan, because due to the fact that she gives you soul as well as gain the 10k power, as well as draw you a card, that is. She at the minimum will be at 33k on the second swing, which is not too bad. Although Meagan will be at 50k, disregarding any triggers and also taking into account if you use Hellblast full dive. So usually what you will do is on the second swing, depending on what you check, most of the trigger power will be going into Marjorie, because Marjorie at the minimum is hitting for 33k and Meagan on the second swing is 50k already. So you might as well just pump the power to Marjorie, because both of them is actually on pretty equal power. And of course, this is also depending on if you get a critical trigger. If you get a critical trigger, most of the time you'll want to pump all of the trigger into Meagan. And as mentioned before, the cost to using her skill, where she puts 1 rearguard to soul, is most of the time going to be Lyle, because Lyle, once he's on place, he's basically dead. After he uses his skill, he's basically just like because the next skill, he's just a 10k vanilla. He does not really do anything, because for a Bruce deck, we don't really have stuff that basically goes back to hand. So yeah, that's Marjorie. I mean, Marjorie is a godsend unit. If you're a new Bruce player, you might have some problem finding Marjorie, because, you know, due to how old she is DBT01, which is like a really long time ago. But hey, if you could find her, do get her. She is super powerful in Bruce, and not to mention cheap too. Last, of course, is the order Hellblast full dive. So it's really funny that not many people know what this does, because I think there's too many Pandemonium builds out there that dominates the Bruce meta for the longest time up until Meagan was being reintroduced. This is basically like a powered down version of Pandemonium, because Pandemonium does gives you soul charge and basically gives the front row 10k and also draws you a card, which is what this card does as well. This card basically, if you play this, you draw one and you basically just call one card from your hand, which therefore increases your consistency into getting your key pieces, because it allows you to draw one and call out one of your units. And if you are in Final Rush, all of your front row will get a 10k. Sound real similar to Pandemonium, right? Because they are the same. Well, Pandemonium does gives you 4 soul charge, but whereas this one doesn't. Your power does drop a little bit if you don't draw into this order during your turn 4 turn. However, it's not like a shoot to the foot if you don't draw into this order like Pandemonium, because if you don't draw into Pandemonium in a Pandemonium build, you're basically not doing anything. But this build, it does not really hinder as much, because you still gain power for free. For example, Meagan gets 10k for free twice. Marjorie does not really use Counterblast to gain power. Doggo as well as Wade does give power with the price of moving them to soul to give power. I mean, this card is basically a bonus power to your front row, as well as giving you a chance to draw into your card pieces from the draw, which is super nice if you ask me. And lastly, of course, is Bruce himself, Unrivaled Bruce, the Grade 4. This is definitely going to be your main boss unit. You will want to ride this as fast as you can, and also depending on your damage, you might not want to ride this. For example, if you are at like 2 counterblasts, I actually would not advise you to ride into Unrivaled Bruce, because, you know, if you use up those 2 counterblasts and your opponent reads that, you are actually in a very deep trouble. But since you're not running Pandemonium, I guess it's still fine. But then again, it's not fine. In any case, the triple drive from Bruce, actually any triggers that you get from the triple drive from the first attack of Bruce is actually really disgusting. If you get any triggers at all, it will increase your potential to OTK. That it's simple as that. Alongside Wade, you're potentially hitting like 33k on the first attack. You could go up to 43 if you have like 2 weight in your hand, which is super disgusting. Even on the restand, you're able to hit for 43k, which is not a number to be scoffed at. It's a Vanguard attack as well. It's really disgusting. However, as mentioned before, you should closely monitor your counterblast usage. Lyle is actually not really a mandatory for you to use, depending on what's in your soul. It's okay for you to delay a turn before you use Lyle, because, you know, your soul does not really have like a very good target to be called unless your soul charge is very, very godly. But then again, it's actually not too bad if you don't use Lyle's skill on your 3rd turn. And that is all for this video. Do let me know down in the comment section on what do you think of this build. Personally, I have a lot of success running this build, and I am really excited to share with you guys. Although I am a bit late, I did promise you guys some time ago where my next video will be my deck profile on Bruce, but yeah, I waited until this long to post this video. I apologize for that, but hey, it's better late than never. Do let me know again, what do you guys think, and of course do let me know what other cards that I could basically consider running in this build. This build is really solid. Do like and subscribe if you like this video, and of course do ring the bell notification icon so that you don't miss a video I upload. With that being said, I'll see you all on the field.